A fire doesn't keep you warm. It steals your heat and throws it into the sky. But one winter, a woman built a system that forced the heat to pay before it could escape. The cold didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It settles in quietly, finding every weakness, every crack, every place you didn't think to seal. Naira Vel had learned that the hard way, not from stories, not from warnings, from watching it happen right in front of her, slowly, day by day. Her husband hadn't died in the mine. He survived that. Broken ribs, a crushed hand, but he walked out, alive, breathing. It was the winter that took him, not with violence, but with patience. A cough that never left, a cold that never warmed, a fire that burned all night and still left the room freezing. Naira had fed that fire everything: wood, furniture, anything that would burn. And it didn't matter, because the heat never stayed. It rose, disappeared, and took their strength with it, until there was nothing left to fight with. Now, it was just her and the boy. Eli sat on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket too thin for what was coming. 7 years old, too young to understand what winter really meant here, too young to know how close they already were to the same ending. The cabin behind them was supposed to be shelter. Solid logs, a stone fireplace, everything a man like Garrick Holt would call strong. But Naira knew better. Strength didn't matter if it was built wrong. The gaps in the walls pulled air through the room, feeding the fire and feeding the cold at the same time. It was a trap, a system designed to fail. Outside, the settlement moved like it always did before winter. Axes striking wood, trees falling, men stacking cord after cord like it was the only answer. More wood, bigger fires, more heat. Naira watched them from the edge of her property. Watched the piles grow. Watched the certainty in their movements. They believed they could win, outwork the cold, outburn it. She knew they couldn't, because she had already tried, and she had already lost. Behind her, the hillside rose up, solid granite buried beneath layers of soil, unmoving, unchanging, the kind of mass that didn't care about winter. She stepped closer, pressed her hand against the ground. Cold on the surface. Something else. Something steady. Something that didn't disappear. A memory. Her husband's voice, echoing from years before. Down below, the earth holds heat, he had said. It doesn't give it up easy, but it never forgets. Naira's breathing slowed, not from relief, from realization. Because if the fire was losing the heat, then the problem wasn't the cold. It was the escape. She turned back toward the cabin, toward the chimney sending warmth into the sky like it didn't matter. Like it was endless. It wasn't. Nothing here was. Her eyes moved from the fire, to the walls, then past them, to the hillside rising behind the cabin. Solid. Ancient. Unchanging. And for the first time, since the fear had started, she stopped thinking about how to burn more wood, and started thinking about how to stop losing heat at all. She didn't begin with the fire. That was the mistake everyone else kept making. They fed it, built it bigger, tried to force it to do something it was never designed to do. Naira stopped looking at the flames and started looking at where they went. Up. Always up. Through the chimney. Into the sky. Gone in seconds. Wasted. She crouched beside the hearth, watching the smoke move. It didn't fight. It didn't struggle. It chose the easiest path. Every time. That was the rule. And rules could be used. Naira stood slowly and turned away from the fire, toward the back wall of the cabin, toward the hill pressed against it. Solid ground, dense clay, granite beneath it, mass, enough to hold something, enough to store something. She stepped outside, walked along the slope, studying the angle, the distance, the path something would take if it were forced to move through it. Then she saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, but enough. A line, running from the fire, through the wall, into the earth. Long, hidden, impossible to escape quickly. Her breathing changed, because this could work. Not by making more heat, but by refusing to let it leave, by forcing it to stay, to move slowly, to give up everything before it could escape. She went back inside without another word, walked straight to the hearth, and started tearing it apart, stone by stone, piece by piece. The back of the fireplace collapsed first, revealing packed earth behind it. Cold, silent, waiting. Eli watched from the corner, his small hands wrapped around his blanket. He didn't ask why. He didn't question it. He just trusted her, the way children do when they don't yet know how close fear really is. Naira took the pickaxe, gripped it tight, and drove it into the earth. The impact rang through her arms. Sharp, heavy, unforgiving. She struck again, and again, each hit carving a little more space, a little more possibility. The soil resisted at first, then gave way. Clay broke in chunks, dense, heavy, falling at her feet as the opening deepened. It was slow work, brutal work, the kind that wore through muscle, through patience, through doubt, because she wasn't just digging, she was committing to something no one else believed in, to something that could kill her if she was wrong. The hole widened, then deepened, then stretched forward into the hill. A narrow tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. The air inside it was different, still, heavy, unmoving. Exactly what she needed. She paused, holding the lantern low, watching the flame. It barely flickered, no draft, no pull. Good, that meant the air would stay where she put it. And the heat would have nowhere to run. She climbed back out, breathing harder now, hands shaking slightly from the effort. Then she looked at the path she had started. Short, crude, but real. And for the first time, she could see it clearly. Not a tunnel. A trap. A long road the heat would be forced to travel. And every inch of that road, it would have to pay. With warmth, with energy. Until there was nothing left to escape with. Naira wiped the dirt from her hands, and picked up the tool again. Because now, there was no turning back. By the 6th day, the tunnel stopped feeling like an idea. And started feeling like a risk. A real one, the kind that doesn't warn you before it happens. The ground changed first. Clay gave way to something harder, mixed with stone, unpredictable. Every strike of the pick carried a different weight. Sometimes it broke clean. Sometimes it bounced back, jarring her arms, sending a sharp pain up through her shoulders. But she kept going, because stopping wasn't an option anymore. The tunnel stretched forward, 1 foot at a time, 2 feet wide, 3 feet high. Just enough space to move, to work, to breathe. Barely. The air grew heavier the deeper she went. Still, dense, holding everything inside. Exactly what she wanted, and exactly what could kill her. Naira paused, lowered the lantern closer to the ground. The flame flickered, not from wind, from lack of it. She watched carefully, counting the seconds. If the flame weakened, if it struggled, she would know. And she would have to get out. Immediately. But it held. Weak, but alive. Just enough air. She exhaled slowly, and went back to work. The next strike changed everything. The wall shifted. Not much. Just enough. A low crack, deep inside the earth. Then movement. Subtle, but real. Naira froze. Every instinct telling her the same thing. Too much pressure. Too much space removed. Not enough support. The ceiling above her was no longer certain. She didn't run, didn't panic, because panic would kill her faster than the collapse. Instead, she moved carefully, backwards, slow, controlled. The earth shifted again, a small cascade of dirt falling behind her. Closer now, too close. She reached the opening, pulled herself out, and rolled onto the cabin floor, just as the tunnel behind her gave way. Not fully, but enough. The entrance narrowed, packed tighter. The air inside it cut off. Naira lay there, breathing hard, staring at the hole she had just crawled out of, that had almost become her grave. Eli rushed to her side. "Ma." His voice small, but steady. She nodded once. "I'm all right." But her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from understanding. This wasn't just hard work anymore. It was precision, structure, balance. She wouldn't survive long enough to finish. She pushed herself up slowly, walked to the pile of wood stacked against the wall, picked up one of the thicker pieces, measured its length, then looked back at the tunnel. Support. That was what she was missing. Not more strength. Not more effort. Structure. The kind her husband had always talked about. The kind that let the earth hold itself, instead of collapsing under its own weight. She dragged the timber across the floor, cut it down with slow, careful strikes. Then another, and another, until she had enough to build a frame. Not large, but strong. She returned to the tunnel, cleared the loose earth, and set the first support into place. Pressed tight against the ceiling. Then the second. Then the third. Each one locking the space, holding it open, forcing the ground to carry its own weight. The tunnel changed immediately. It felt different. More stable. More certain. Naira stepped back, looking at what she had built. Not just a hole anymore. Not just a risk. A structure. Something that could hold. Something that could last. But the cost was clear now. This would take longer than she thought. More effort. More precision. More time. Time she didn't have. Outside, the air had already changed. Colder. Sharper. Winter wasn't coming anymore. It was almost here. Naira picked up the lantern and stepped back into the tunnel. Because now, she understood something that mattered more than speed. If this wasn't built right, she wouldn't live to see winter at all. By the time the tunnel reached its full length, winter was already at the door. 40 feet into the hill. A narrow path carved through clay and stone, held in place by timber and pressure. At the far end, she built the last piece, the chimney, not above the cabin, not where the heat could escape quickly, but far up the slope, hidden, rising from the ground like it belonged there, tall enough to pull, strong enough to draw, far enough to make the heat travel. She sealed the edges with clay, packed every gap, every seam, until there was only one path left, through the tunnel. No shortcuts, no escape, exactly the way she needed it. Back inside the cabin, the hearth no longer looked like a fireplace. It was smaller now, tighter, built for something different. Not a long, lazy burn, but a fast, violent one. She stacked the wood carefully. Not much, just enough. Because this wasn't about feeding the fire. It was about controlling it. She struck the match. The flame caught quickly, then surged, hotter than before, faster. The fire roared inside the chamber, contained, forced upward, forced forward. Smoke didn't drift. It moved, pulled into the tunnel with purpose. Naira stepped back, watching the opening where it disappeared, listening, waiting for the failure, for the moment it would turn back, fill the room, end everything. It didn't. The pull held. Strong, steady. The chimney was doing its work, drawing the flow forward, keeping the system alive. Time passed. The fire burned down, collapsing into coals, then ash. Silence returned. No flames, no roar, nothing left to burn. This was the moment, the one that mattered. In every other house, this was when the cold came back, when the heat vanished, when the fire had to be fed again, again, and again, and again. Naira didn't move. She walked to the back wall, pressed her hand against the stone. Cold. Then, slowly, changing. Warmth. Not sharp, not immediate. Deep, steady. She turned, knelt, placed her hand on the floorboards. The same. Faint at first, then stronger, spreading. Not from the fire, from the ground itself. The heat had moved. Through the tunnel, into the earth. And now, it was coming back. Slowly. Relentlessly. Exactly the way she had planned. Outside, the wind rose. Not a breeze anymore, something heavier. The first real storm of the season. Snow began to fall. Soft at first, then faster. Layer by layer, covering the ground, covering the roof. Pressing down on everything beneath it. Inside, the temperature didn't change. The air stayed still. Warm. Contained. The walls held the heat, the floor held it. The earth itself refused to let it go. Naira sat back slowly, watching the room around her. No roaring fire. No constant feeding. No desperation, just warmth. Eli moved across the floor, sat beside her. His small hands resting on the boards. "They're warm," he said. Naira nodded. Because that was the proof. Not the fire, not the system, the result. They weren't fighting the cold anymore, they were outside of it.
And as the storm grew stronger, as the wind carved through the valley, as every other fire burned higher, hers didn't need to. Because the heat was no longer escaping.
Winter didn't arrive slowly. It dropped into the valley like something alive. A weight, a pressure, a cold so deep it didn't feel like air anymore. It felt like something trying to enter your body and stay there. The temperature fell below anything the settlers had prepared for. 20 below, 30, then lower. The kind of cold that doesn't warn you, it just takes. In town, fires burned without stopping. Day and night. Wood piles that had taken months to build vanished in weeks. Men stopped talking about comfort. They talked about survival. And even that was no longer certain. Garrick Holt held out longer than most. His house was stronger, his woodpile larger, his certainty greater, until it wasn't. The fire demanded more, always more, and the cold took just as much. Heat rose, cold rushed in. Again, again. A cycle he could not break, a fight he could not win. By the third week, his wood was gone. Not low, gone. He burned what was left. Furniture, broken boards, anything that would catch flame. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. That was when he thought of her. Not with respect, not with hope, with certainty. She would be dead. The woman who dug into the ground, who sealed her chimney, who chose the earth over the sky. It had to end that way. There was no other outcome. But something didn't sit right, because even in a winter like this, he hadn't seen smoke from her chimney, not once. And that made no sense. So he went, not to help, not to save, but to take what might be left behind, because his own survival no longer allowed for pride. The walk nearly killed him, wind tearing at his breath, cold biting through every layer, each step slower than the last, each breath thinner, until the world itself felt like it was closing in. He almost missed the cabin. Snow had buried most of it. Only the door remained visible. And the chimney. But there was no smoke. That confirmed it. Too late. He stepped forward, raised his hand, and knocked. Once. Twice. Then waited. For nothing. But something came. The sound of movement inside. A bar sliding free. The door opened, and the world stopped making sense. Neera stood there. Alive. Calm. Not wrapped in furs. Not shaking. Just standing. Behind her, warm light filled the room. Not harsh. Not blazing. Deep. Steady. Garrick stepped inside, stumbling slightly, his body already failing him. And then he felt it. Not from the fire. From the air itself. Warmth. Everywhere. Even. Unchanging. He looked at the hearth. No roaring flames. Only a small bed of coals. Impossible. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the room. The boy sat on the floor, playing. No blankets. No shivering. Alive. Garrick moved to the back wall, raised his hand, and pressed it against the stone. He froze, because the stone was warm. Not surface heat, not from the fire. Deep, radiating, coming from within it. He dropped to one knee, pressed his hand against the floor. The same. Warmth rising from below, from the earth itself. The truth hit him all at once. Not slowly, not gently. She hadn't made a bigger fire. She had stopped losing the heat. She had forced it to stay, to move, to give everything it had before it could escape. Garrick looked up at her, his certainty gone, replaced by something he had never allowed before. Doubt. How? The word barely came out. Neera didn't answer right away. She stepped forward, knelt beside him, and placed a piece of charcoal on the floor. She began to draw. A small firebox. A long tunnel. The chimney far away. And the path between them. You don't fight the cold, she said quietly. You make the heat work. Garrick stared at the drawing, then at the walls around him. Everything he had built, everything he believed, had been wrong. Not weak, just inefficient. Outside, the storm continued. Unchanged, unforgiving. But inside, it no longer mattered. Because for the first time, someone had built a place where the cold could not take anything away.